Okay, so when I do these coding demos, generally speaking, I like to put our IDE on the left side of the screen. And actually, hang on a sec here. Yeah, and I put the and we put our web page, kind of whatever we're doing on the right side of the screen. Okay, so the IDE that we use in this class is called Visual Studio Code. Okay, so it looks like this. Right, so if you don't have it, you can Google for it, like VS Code. Right, so Visual Studio Code, free editor. Yeah, it's works really nice for this sort of work. Okay, so we'll demo in VS Code. The other thing that that I like to use is called the Live Server plugin. So so this is how we use this for homework grading, and it's just it's a nice way to like test your code from the IDE. So if you want to, if you have VS Code, once you have it, you can just Google like VS Code Live Server, right? And the first link should be what you want. Yeah, so this is the live server. And then when you're in your code, you should just be able to right click. Once you've installed it, this sort of option should pop up. Open with live server. So if I open an HTML file and run that, there you go. Yeah, so right, so it'll run. Okay. Now the other nice thing with live server is it's live. So if I so if I do something like that, right, if I do that, if I save it, so if I hit Control S, right, live server will automatically update the web page, right? I don't have to reload the server or stop and start it again. Right, so it's a nice little tool, and it's a good tool to use for the class. Okay, so today's lecture, kind of think of it like a ground up, like start from zero, talk about some of the basics of HTML and CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. So again, if you've never done HTML before, if you've never done web programming before, might certainly benefit you to also look at some resources outside of the class. Right, it's very likely that they will be better teachers than I am. Okay, so starting from the beginning, right? HTML. Does anyone know what HTML stands for? Yeah.
Hypertext markup language.
Yeah, hypertext markup language. So HTML is a markup language that defines the structure or the pieces, the components of a web page. Okay, and so an HTML file, right? So we have a file here. You can see it's named index2.html. So this is what I'm just going to use for doing demoing some HTML code today. Right, this index2.html file is interpreted by your web browser. So Google Chrome. I have a Google Chrome browser there on the right, and it parses and interprets that markup language to display some sort of content on its on the screen, right? So this is a very simple HTML file, right? And it's also, if we open up this just like a folder window, right? I can see it's right here too. So I can actually open this file by double clicking on it. There you go. So, right, and you can see here, if I do that, there's the web page, right? And you can see that the URL to that web page is just it's like a file a file path, right? So Chrome is like, okay, so open this file on my local hard drive at whatever location that it's at. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, we're going to use a live server to do that. Right. So you can see here when I access it that way, I actually get an HTTP address, so 127.001 with a colon 5500, and that's the port number that we're accessing at. Okay, so let me ask y'all a question. So I like to ask a lot of questions. Hope that's okay. So why do you think I'm using like a this little live server to open the files as opposed to like double clicking the file on my in a Finder window? Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to refresh every time you make a change in your code.
Okay, so otherwise I have to. All right, so here's the file. So actually, let's do this. All right, so let's go off script here. I like going off script. All right, so there we go. Okay, so now I got both. Right. Okay, so let's update this guy. Good luck. Ha ha ha. All right, so let's do that. Let's save it. Right. Okay, so live server updated. Okay, so I have to let's Control R, reload. All right, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, one benefit is I don't have to like manually reload the page. That's kind of a little bit annoying. Yeah, so that's a benefit. It's not the main one though. Yeah.
Oh.
So say that one more time.
Access the website for a server.
Okay, yeah, so I'm basically mimicking like accessing an actual web server. Like when we access google.com, right? There's some HTML that gets created at some point on the Google servers, and it's served to my browser, which generates it. So we're kind of replicating like what if I publish this on an actual online server. Yeah, so that's one reason. Okay, so most browsers, so what you said, most browsers apply restrictions about opening local files because like it might not know what it is. So that is kind of also so in conjunction with, you're replicating an actual server. So web servers will not let you directly access a file. It's a major security risk, right? Because like when I want to go, I go to my parents send me some link and they're like, hey, click this and you can win money like I did, right? That doesn't sound fishy at all, right? Well, this is not a security course, right? We're in data viz. So we can click that link. Okay, so we go there, right? If that web page said something like access Chris's local file at whatever file path and like revoke all his access and give it to the hacker, right? That would be very bad. So a browser has like big security restrictions against accessing local files. Yeah, now it'll let you do something really basic like this, where it's just like raw HTML. But if I have any like JavaScript functions in there, especially things that try to get resources, it'll start throwing all sorts of like security risk messages on the back end. So with D3, we access data, right? We import data sets to our web pages. So if you do it through like double clicking on your file explorer or your Finder window to load the page, your D3 code is not going to run. And if you open up your dev console, your web console, you'll actually see messages like, some like it made a request that violates some security thing. Yeah. So accessing like a web server will let you access resources that are on the web server. Okay, so that is kind of the, we don't want to get unfettered access to anything on my file system, right? Because I've got personal information, credit cards, maybe like, sensitive information that I don't want a random person to have. So that's why there's these sorts of restrictions. Okay, so we're not going to access by double clicking anymore, right? We'll stick to accesses via the live server. Okay, so let's just walk through the elements that make up this very basic kind of hello world web page. Okay, so first thing we got is this doc type HTML tag. Okay, so the very first line, what we're doing is we're declaring to the web browser that we are writing an HTML document. Okay, so this document is of HTML type, right? And specifically, this will tell Chrome or Safari or whatever you're using. We want to use the latest version of HTML, so HTML5, right? Next, we have an HTML tag. Right? You might actually notice there's a closing tag. There's two HTML tags, and that should be closed. There you go. Right. So next is an HTML tag, and that tag has both an opening and a closing. That element does. Okay. So lots of elements in an HTML file have this sort of open and close element, right? And everything inside of that is nested content, because this is how lots of HTML content is written. Right? So everything inside this HTML block, the browser is going to interpret that as HTML elements or content or items that should be displayed. Right? And there's other types of blocks that we can have too. So for example, the head block here, right? Head includes information, kind of header information about your page. So, right, and this is information that's not necessarily displayed in the web page, right? So you can see here we have a title. Right? That title is displayed in the toolbar of the page, right? And usually in the head block, this is where you'll do things like, if I want to link to an external JavaScript file or like a CSS file, right? If I want to access an external file, usually those sorts of includes will go in the head block. Then we also have a body tag here. And the body tag contains what's actually visible in my web page, right? So generally speaking, the body tag includes the content that actually goes in your page, right? Okay, so let's look at some more HTML elements. So if you're looking along at the GitHub code, right? So this GitHub code you can access at this link right here, right? GitHub SU CSE 494 2023 lectures, right? This is linked from the Canvas site. It's this link right here, right? So if you go there and look, we have a kind of a basic index page, right? So I'll be pulling some elements from this page, and we'll just kind of go through them here in the Visual Studio Code, right? Okay, so let's grab some elements and just throw them in here. Right, so let me just copy paste these. So, all right, so let me paste in some elements real quick. Okay, now if I save this, let's turn on the word wrap too. Okay. All right, so let's look at a couple more very basic HTML elements. Okay, so all right, so we have our kind of our starter sentence right here, and below that we have a new element called h1. Right, and then we have an h2, h3, h4. Right, so these are examples of header tags. And so headers are, kind of like, think of it like for a Word document, right? Like a section header. So used for like titles or kind of adding a title to content. Right? So pretty straightforward, right? And you can kind of see that the browser already knows, there's some idea of styling, right? H1 is bigger than H2. Chrome already knew that. And if I open it in Safari or Firefox or whatever, right, H1 will also be the biggest header tag. Now, one thing to keep in mind, right, like browsers don't always display content exactly the same, right? We all know this. Sometimes Firefox might display it a little bit differently. But generally speaking, right, H1 is your browser knows this is for the biggest headers, right, and then going down. Below that, we have two examples of lists. So here's the corresponding code on the HTML page. Right, so an unordered list. We start the list with a UL tag, and then li, which is a list item. Right, again, we open the HTML element, add our content inside, and then close the HTML element. Right, so once we're done with the list, we add a close tag to close that list. Right, ordered list looks very similar, except instead of a UL for unordered list, we open it with an OL for ordered list. Right, and so that's, instead of using bullet points on the page, it actually enumerates, right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, but the list items use the same li tag, like that. And then finally, the p tag stands for paragraph. So paragraphs are generally intended to contain like a body or a section of text. Right, and kind of the default rendering for a paragraph that your browser knows is to put a blank line kind of before and after. Right, so if I opened up another paragraph, right, if I save that, right, you can see there's actually a line break. So the reason I keep kind of mentioning these things is to kind of, right, your browser has this idea of, this is the content that I'm providing it in a markup language. Your browser is interpreting that and applying, right, this line break. Right, the line break is not coming from the fact that there's a gap here. And if I could even, do something like this, right, make it not very good readable code. And if I save that again, right, reload the page, the styling, how the elements are actually kind of styled and arranged on the page, it's based on your browser parsing and interpreting the code. Okay. All right. Now, one thing we can do in your browser is you can right-click and you can select this inspect. This inspect option, and that will open up your dev tools. Okay, so Chrome has these, Firefox has these, I'm pretty sure Safari and Edge also have it, right? Your dev tools is a really, really handy thing to use while you're programming, right? It's really nice for debugging and kind of like understanding what's the content on your page. Okay, so, right, so if this is my HTML, I can actually see here in this Elements tab, I can see my HTML, right? And if I hover over it, I can actually see the, it actually highlights the elements that are there. So, right, and even comments, right? A comment like this isn't actually rendered on the page, right? When Chrome interprets my page, it just skips it, right? But it still keeps that comment in what's called the DOM, or the document object model. So does anyone know what the DOM is? Not the Fast and Furious DOM, the Chrome, the browser document object model. Does anyone know what that is? I'm sure some of you do. You're nervous. That's okay. Right? It's intimidating to speak up when you could be wrong. Okay, so the document object model is it's a big tree structure basically, and it's a data structure that contains all of the content in your web page. Okay, so right, so at the very top of the tree is this HTML tag, right? And that tag has two children, right? There's the head tag and the body tag, right? And so when Chrome parses this content, right, it creates this document object model data structure, okay? And based on how that data structure is organized, that kind of is how the elements get put on the page, right? So like the head generally contains content that isn't actually rendered in your browser, right? It's metadata, maybe it updates the toolbar up here. The body, right? Everything in the body, these are all nested children of the body element, right? And you go all the way down to like leaf nodes, right? Here's a H2 thing. Inside of that is just some raw text. And so it's kind of like a leaf node in the document object model tree, right? And it gets rendered like that. So this is nice because it makes it easier to kind of analyze or kind of structure your web page. And it's good for debugging too. Another really useful feature in the Chrome Web Tools is the console tab, right? So I can, there's different tabs up here I can switch beside. The two that we use a lot in this class is elements. We'll kind of observe like, what's my DOM look like? And then the console. So you can do like a print statement in JavaScript, a console logging statement, and it'll print out here. So just like a logger in another language doing a print statement. So that's a great way to kind of debug your code, track your code, make sure you're doing things properly. Okay. All right, let's look at a couple other elements. Okay. So let's look at, pull this back here. Now, I want to show you just a quick example of styling. So, styling, normally we do this with, like a CSS file, right? And what a CSS file does is it styles the elements, right? So elements, right? Like a paragraph tag or a list tag, it controls their styling or their appearance, okay? So styling works with the HTML elements to kind of manipulate not just the content, but how the content is shown. So I can apply styling by doing something like, let's see, I could do something like this. I could say style equals color equals aqua. Really eager to get in here and learn. Okay, I came in here at like 1:45 and it's like no one in here. All right, so if I do this, right, and then I save this, okay? Okay, so, right, I added this. Now we have something interesting going on. Let me right, so that's a little hard to see. How about we do a different color? Say red. Okay. So now I have both an element and a style, okay? And specifically, this is what's called inline styling. So I'm applying a styling kind of directly integrated with my HTML code. So this is not how it's normally done. Normally we have it kind of separate it as a separate file. But this is allowed by, by the HTML and CSS standards, right? And what this is doing is when Chrome is parsing this, right, it says, okay, so we get to this content. As it's gonna put it on the page, it notices, okay, so there's some sort of styling that's being applied. So manipulate how that object is shown, right? So CSS controls the appearance of our HTML content, right? So do something like that. Okay, let's look at a couple other things. Some examples of images, and I think that's all we got time for today. All right. Okay, so this is this IMG tag. This stands for image. Now, you might notice, right? So for most of the elements that I've added to the page so far, you might notice there's an opening tag and also a closing tag. But for images, we don't actually need a closing tag. Why do you think that is? There aren't any elements you can put inside an image. Correct. Yeah, so it's like this, it's as low as you can go. Yeah, so we can't actually put anything inside an image. Good. Okay, so let me save this and load it. All right, so save. There we go. Okay. That's really big. There you are. Oh, hey there. All right, so what's going on here? Okay, so first thing. Source, right? We have a src source tag. So that's where I say, where is the image located? Okay. Now, if you remember, we're accessing it through kind of a web server, right? We're accessing it through a web server, a local web server. Okay. So we're saying locally, there should be a file named sparky.jpg, right? And so there is. And so it's right there. Okay, so that's what it looks like. I could also give it like a URL here. I could do that instead. That would be an online resource. But I'm saying there's a local, the URL for the image I want to get is just locally sparky.jpg. And alt, so alt just means if the image can't display for some reason, then some alternative text will be displayed instead. So that's what alt means. Now, when I display this image, right, if I pull it up in VS Code here, right, it kind of sizes it to make it fit. That's not what actually happened on the page here, right? It's like really big. I have to scroll to get all the way across, right? It's full resolution. Okay. So there's also ways we can control the size of the image. So I could say something like width equals, say, 300. Let's try that. Save that. Okay, that's better, right? So what that says is restrict the width of that image to be exactly 300 pixels. So if the image is bigger than 300, shrink it. If it's smaller than 300, make it 300. Okay, so that works. Now, it kept it at, right, it also shrunk the vertical size of the image, right? So the aspect ratio is correct. I could also do something like this, where I say, height equals, I need to like lock that door. Right, I could do something like this, height equals 50. We save that. All right, so that's not actually what we want, right? It's actually, if we do width and height, now it'll, resize both. So maybe better to, let's just get rid of that. All right, so I can do that. All right, so that's better, right? So I can do that. Another thing I could do, right? So if I say 300, that's pixels, but I could say something like, say, 50%. So let's save that. Okay, so now it's 50% of the page. Okay. And if I make my page bigger or smaller, you actually notice that it's resizing itself dynamically. All right, that's kind of cool. What else could I do? Maybe I could do something like, what if I want it to resize until I hit some like maximum size? And so what I could actually do then is I could give it a max width. Okay. Now to do that, I could say something like style equals max width 300 pixels. Right, I could say something like that. All right. So now, if you notice, the size is actually changing until I hit some maximum width. Okay. So a couple things going on here. You might wonder, well, for this, I was able to just say width, right? But for something like max width, I had to put that in a style tag. Man, is this going to be like all semester? Kid.
I think it's a heat, honestly.
Is it like the same? It's not the same person. It's got to be a different person.
It has something to do with the heat. So
Like every time someone new comes up, everyone's like, "Don't say anything. Let them." Like a classic. Okay, so last thing for today, right? So we have a width tag, we have an alt tag, and a style tag. I also had to use a style tag for doing the color, right? There's different ways to do style, right? So these are kind of like properties of that specific HTML element, right? So if I go look at the documentation for IMG, it has these specific, right? There's a source property, there's an alt property, and a width property. But something like a max width that will dynamically kind of stop the width, that style says we actually want to kind of go beyond the base properties and apply a CSS style. Okay, so now there's CSS that's kind of getting invoked, and it's going to override the width property. Okay, so this is actually what is kind of the start of the idea behind what we call responsive design. We don't care too much about responsive design in this course, but it's the idea that, you know, maybe I'm accessing this on a phone, like a mobile device, right? I want to design my web page in a way that makes more sense for that device, right? The screen size might be different, or like the scrolling might, you know, I don't have like a mouse. Again, we really don't talk about it much in this class, but that's kind of the idea behind this sort of like dynamic. It's a very big thing in web development, but yeah. We are at time. We'll let them come in, I guess. See y'all on Thursday. Yeah.
I wasn't here on Thursday because I just kind of